So for whatever reason, I pushed a lot of the doom, the stoner music, and some of the various outliers before number 55 in the list, and now we find that I had arranged quite a lot of the black and death metal records right here in kind of the center of the list. So as we approach number 55, we get to a dark metal record from a black death metal legend out of Norway, Eternus, and Philosopher is it's kind of both one of their best records, but also one of their least accessible records. Their previous record had been so approachable, so finessed, and it wasn't really heavy in the sense that it was more of almost a progressive record in a lot of aspects. And Philosopher brings back the very focused and aggressive side of Eternus without bringing back the death metal necessarily. So this is a substantial record, a very meaningful record, also one where some of the lyrics just don't make sense to me. I think that maybe some of this is lost in translation or whatnot, but overall a fine record, and I think this is worthy of Eternus's legacy. I'm a huge fan of all of their work, and that includes, you know, their death metal records and all that too. So if you're as much of a fan of Eternus as I am, then I would definitely recommend it to you. Sage of Shekinah is the latest full-length album from Contrarian. It sits at number 54 on the list, and for good reason. This is a great band, and probably one of the most accomplished progressive death metal bands from the United States these days, and one that is vastly underrated, especially for this material, which is both increasingly melodic and musical in their explorations, but also developing skills outside of the usual sort of technical death metal needling, which doesn't tend to have as much feeling as what they've managed here. I think that adding feeling and movement to progressive death metal in a fairly traditional style overall gives it a different life. And there's a lot of just infectious and memorable pieces on this record that set it above standard, well above standard. And so I was really impressed with this one. I think I didn't see a lot of people, talking about it too much after release. I think it was a little bit undersold by some writers, but for me, this reaches a very high standard, and I can't even imagine what they'll do next, because I feel like this is a very high point for this style and what they've done with it so far. So, huge recommendation for me on this one. Black Medium Current is the latest album from Dot Heimskard. It sits at number 53 here, and I think because it's so different from what they've done before, and we've come to expect them to do something different on not so much every album, but every time anything changes in the band. And this is more or less a solo formation of Dot Heimskard at this point, and it does whatever it wants. It does a lot of interesting things, and it's very much an avant-garde, atmospheric black metal record, which is progressive as often as it is sort of fiery in its movement. And we don't so much get a summation of everything Dot Heimskard have done up to this point. You know, a lot of artists become more retrospective as they get older, but I find that this is searching for something new. It's looking for something that they haven't heard before, and it finds it on this record. It's remarkable. It's a great record. So I hope that, it has been well received, and I'm glad that more people have gotten in touch with this band and their legacy. But also, what they're doing now is just as interesting as what they were doing in the past. So, and that's a pretty difficult thing to manage on a 70-minute record. 9 records later or whatever it is. So, pretty exceptional album. I think in terms of who did funeral death doom metal best this year, probably No Dawn for the Caligulous Knights is one of the finest examples of funeral doom aptitudes, very much in a Finnish style, finessed into death metal as well. And the important thing for me for this style of music is that the death metal is substantial, that the rhythms are good death metal and not just filler movement. And that's kind of the big deal here, is that the death metal sections count here for more than bluster and simple movement, and they have riffs. So otherwise, the presentation and the style of the band has gotten even more dramatic and lofty in its presentation and vocalizations. I think that not only is the vocalist Marco Newman increasingly more expressive and interesting in everything that he does on each record that he's on, but in this band, they've incorporated just more flourish on everything, and to the point where you could look back at these old records that I've recommended, like Tyranny and Esoteric, and find that this does feel like an extra level beyond that. It does feel like there's something more to it. The second full-length album from Totenmess, Fictionlust, sits at number 51, and this is a abstract black metal band who have kind of lost to the Black Death side of their sound and leaned more into the avant-garde and somewhat tuneful black metal side of things, which is more very much in keeping with what is most current in Polish black metal, but without fully fusing with the post-black metal scene. This is not a sleepy record. This is a violent, cataclysmic record with a lot to say and a lot of riffs. It's a pretty substantial record. I think if you're a fan of, more recent Deathspell Omega and groups like that, this fits in there somewhere. Although it does, again, it has its more tuneful moments. It does feel like it is reaching for some guitar hooks and things like that. And it doesn't really feed into dissonance so drastically as one might expect. So a fine record, I think a bit of an overlooked record.
Fortune, I know. If I want to forget something, I could.
Black Mirror is the latest full-length album from Mortuary Drape. I put it at number 50 because I think this is a great time and place to celebrate both the history of Mortuary Drape and to point out that this sixth full-length album is not that different from their first or second one in a lot of in spirit and in sound, because they are still an old evil heavy metal band with influences from thrash metal, death metal, and traditional heavy metal and horror rock that sort of keep it keeps surprising with each record what they're capable of. And I think their last record was so good, and it's been so long, that it's surprising that they could come back and put out this to the same high standard. Now, they do one thing, and they do themselves, and that's consistent throughout this full record, and it's a long record. So if you don't know what that is, like, that consistency might not mean that much to you, but I think that if you're a fan of their first couple of records, or you don't really know what the rest of their discography is like, this is a great reintroduction to the band. They are a black metal, heavy metal, and thrash metal thing, but it's their own. And the interesting thing, I guess, about this record is that there's a bit more merciful fate here than ever, and that includes a couple of clean vocal spots there, here and there. So they're pushing it. They're still doing something different, and they're reaching for an ideal that's been there for a long time. So So everybody knows I'm a huge fan of death metal and the riffs that it provides, and Lamentation of Immolated Souls, the debut full-length album from Chilean death metal quartet Sepulcrum, sits at number 49 because it has riffs. It is in the spirit of early Florida death metal for the most part, and the diaspora, which has expanded that around. Now, this isn't a complex record, isn't a technical record, it is just a sort of a thrashing traditional death metal record with a lot of its own ideas in terms of connecting kinetic and frantic grooves with traditional spheres of death metal riffcraft. You know, there is a lot of Morbid Angel in there that you'll feel right away, but they've twisted it in a way where it's not just kind of rote Altars of Madness style stuff. So for me, this was a substantial record. It's the kind of record I like to pick up and listen to all the time, and it hits this high on the list because I listened to it that many times. So very much a strong recommendation on that one. Mass Grave Horizon is the debut full-length album from Excarnated Entity, and this is a death doom metal band who are now based in Portland. They were originally formed in Seattle, as far as I know, and now they've moved down to Portland and changed their sound a little bit. They're now incorporating more melodic elements, and much in the same way a band like Innumerable Forms has now started to incorporate influence from the early British spectrum of melodic death to metal. There's a little bit of that here, but these guys are still focused on the early 90s side of traditional death doom metal, which I would consider less the cyanide side of things and maybe more the Netherlands school of death doom metal. And overall, this is a record that just kind of has all of the pieces together to create this like surrealistic feeling of death doom metal. They have quite a bit of patience, but they still can hammer out real death metal riffs. So if you're looking for sort of more canonical feeling death doom metal for the classicist, this is the right touch, the right feeling. But they're evolving pretty quickly considering where they were just a few years ago with their last release. So this is a standout record for my taste, and it's cool that they've kind of stepped everything up in general on this record. Ruins is the latest full-length album from Burial Hordes, an Athens, Greece-based black and death metal quartet, who on album number 5, they're basically reconfiguring themselves in a way where the ratio of death and black metal is more in service to the song. And I'm not saying they're writing catchy, bouncy, memorable songs so much as they are effective, riff-driven pieces that are both chaotic but also readable and dramatic in their reveal. I think that similar records from Heretic Cult Redeemer this year and Embrace of Thorns last year help to speak to the creativity still available to black and death metal, which is not too married to one scene or another, and they're kind of creating their own sense of movement and dramatism within that. So there are some pretty memorable, tuneful songs on here that caught my ear for their dramatic aggression more than anything else, and I found myself listening to this record quite a bit, just kind of drawn to it because of its aesthetic and also its sound. And yeah, it just stood out to me in particular. At number 46, we have Kostnatieni, their second full-length album, Upal, and this is an abstract black metal taken probably as far as you can. There are some death metal influences there in general. I think that this record feels very much in the style of exploration that we get from Oddsmanuk and Rhinoceros, and that sort of exploration that was over the top for a new scene in black metal in the United States. And I think that he's built upon that in a way that is his own. And each record is different from this fellow. Each thought is a different vibration. And this one I would just describe, or I do describe here, as profoundly insectoid. It's haunting, but it's buzzing, and it's a sense of fusion that is a novel idea. Now, although the two Odds Manuk records that came out this year explore some similar things, in their movement and all that, I found that this was still more of a memorable experience. I know that a lot of people kind of moved on quickly from the sort of spectacle of this record, but I found that it almost felt like a different experience when I came back like 4 or 5 months later and listened to it again, because there's so much detail that it does reveal itself in layers if you've forgotten the amount of compositional density available to it. So I felt there was a lot of value there each time I returned to it, and it just seemed like there's so much put into it that you quite possibly could get something different out of it every time you picked it up.